Well, good morning. It's July 21st, and in this video, we are going to go through a mid-summer tour through our garden. For those of you that don't know us or are new to the channel, I'm Peter with the Garden Family, and we garden in Southwest Ohio, Zone 6B. The garden you're going to see today, we started from scratch less than 2 years ago. So without further ado, let's go and see what's growing in the garden. So let's start with everyone's favorite, tomatoes. These are our indeterminate tomatoes, so they're the vining type that just continue to grow and grow and grow throughout the season. As you can see, we trellis these on what I call the tomato tower, and there are 12 different spots for tomatoes in this 4-foot by 12-foot bed. The reason we can get away with that spacing is we train them to a single stem and then attach them to these 8-foot stakes that are attached to the tomato tower. So let's go over a few of the varieties that we really like. One of them is right here. These are called Juliets, and they make just these really long trusses of sort of medium-sized oblong tomatoes. They look like paste tomatoes, but they're actually a little bit more juicy, so they're pretty good for fresh eating as well. And you can kind of see what those look like there. We'll be harvesting these today. Let's come back here, a few other varieties that I wanted to show you. This one right here, these are Brandy Boy. So they're a brandywine-like tomato, but they are hybrid, and so they have better disease resistance. And we've been pretty impressed by these tomatoes here. If you see this on the tomato, that's just called cat facing. It's pretty common in an heirloom tomato. It's really nothing to worry about. They still taste great, but that's a nice big tomato. Let's set that aside for the future, and let's look right here. So this is actually one of my favorite tasting tomatoes. These are Black Krim. We've actually grown this specific tomato multiple years. We've saved the seeds from it. One thing that's a little strange about it is it tends to get a lot of leaf curl. So if you see your tomato leaves doing this, where they curl up, especially on the lower leaves, it's just a sign of some sort of physiological stress, and some tomato plants do it a lot more than others. But let's take a look at some of these Black Krim tomatoes. We got to get all of these harvested as well. And just a nice deep color. These have a little bit more acidity, really rich flavor to those. And then let's go around this way and look at a few more. These ones here, these are Cherokee Green, and they're ready right around this color. Been pretty happy with how prolific these tomatoes are. They're kind of a yellowish green on the outside, but the inside flesh stays green, and they're pretty tasty. We do have a little pest right here. Let's zoom in right there. We're gonna get back to this pest in the future, but that is a spotted cucumber beetle. See if I can get it out of there. They're not good for your garden. Last tomato just to cover. This one right here. This is Mr. Stripey. Hilary's behind the camera there. And this is her favorite tasting tomato. As opposed to the Black Krim, the yellow tomatoes in general have less acidity and a little bit more sweetness. So if you like that in a tomato, this is our favorite one. There's a lot of tomatoes that are pretty similar to this. Pineapple comes to mind as one that's pretty similar. But this one's called Mr. Stripey. I'm gonna see if I can get this one off of here because it is huge. Pretty tough to cut though. Sometimes these heirlooms, the stem gets really close in there. There we go. But look at the size of that. That's that cat facing we were talking about. But I think there's going to be plenty of good tomato in there. These other ones are also ready to go, but we'll get those after we're done with the video. As far as how we trellis the tomatoes, let me show you right here on this lemon boy. This tomato right here, this is a hybrid tomato called a lemon boy, and they're actually ripe when they're yellow, just like that. But as far as the trellis itself, what we've done with this tomato is we've made sure to keep it as a single stem. And you can see right here, as we get to the top, what we're doing. So this is the main stem right here, and then this is just side shoot that's coming at the crotch of this branch. And so what we do is we just take all of those side shoots off, and then we continue this plant as a single stem up here. If we take a step back and we kind of look through the middle of this, you can see what that does is it allows really good airflow through the plant, between all of the plants. And that's part of the reason why we've had pretty good lack of disease for these plants, even though they're pretty tightly spaced. The other thing you'll find with tomatoes, and we're gonna see that in the paste tomatoes shortly, is they get pretty heavy. And so that's why I created this structure here, just a stake in the ground. Unless it's a T-post and you're really deep, it's probably not enough to support a tomato. So I've kind of structured it so they're all supporting each other. Speaking of other ways of trellising, let's go ahead and look at the cherry tomatoes. Those are trellised in a different way, and I'm really happy with it. So let's go over here. So our cherry tomatoes, you can see, are trellised in a different way. These are in 8-foot cages. So this tomato right here is called a Super Sweet 100. It's a hybrid cherry tomato. Has these nice small red fruits just like that. And as the name implies, they are very, very sweet, super tasty. So the tomato, what I did with this one, cherry tomatoes in general, I found to be really vigorous, and it's kind of hard to contain them into a single stem. So what I did with this tomato is, if we look down here, I initially allowed it to grow and then just allowed those side shoots to start coming off. I did that until I got 12 different side shoots, and then I took them as a single stem. In fact, I'm going to take that one off because it looks a little tight on there. This must have been early in the process. But I took them as a single stem up each vertical component of this cage. And if we look up here, this cage is 8 feet tall. And so I've got 12 different leaders going up, and that allows nice even spacing and relatively good airflow in the plant, even though there's so many leaders. And if we look over here on this side, you can see just how many tomatoes we are getting off of this plant. I don't think we're gonna need any more cherry tomatoes, but we do have a couple more plants. Let's at least look at one of them. This one over here is a sun gold. So sun gold is an heirloom tomato, and so it's a little bit less vigorous than the Super Sweet 100. You can see this one's just about 8 feet tall. I did trellis it the same way, with 12 different leaders going up these vertical components, and that again allows really good airflow. Not sure if you can see my hand in here, but basically there's no tomato on the inside here. Sun gold, in comparison to Super Sweet 100, is a little bit more disease prone, so it's even more important with this type of tomato. Between the two, the sun gold, we've done a blind taste test, and this one wins every time. Just an absolutely tasty tomato. Probably something we look forward to every summer, the first ripe sun gold tomato. And we do have other tomatoes. We actually have 36 paste tomato plants, and so let me show you how we're growing those, because it's actually different than these first two. So this jungle right here, these are our paste tomatoes, and it's hard to see the individual plants at this point, but there are 36 of these plants, and what they're actually growing in is different than the other plants. So first of all, if you just look at the amount of fruit we have on these, again, it's hard to see a lot of it just because of how dense the foliage is. These plants are determinate plants, meaning they're the bush type tomatoes. So we don't prune them at all. We just let them grow, and they will actually stop growing on their own and start focusing on fruit production. We like those for paste tomatoes because in general, you're going to get a lot of the fruit at the same time. It allows you to sort of batch make pasta sauce and other tomato sauces. But if we look right here, you'll be able to see what these are growing in. Luckily, there's a little bit of an open patch because these have gotten so heavy, a lot of them have fallen over. But what this is growing in is actually straw. And so we grow a lot of things in straw, including our paste tomatoes. And the way you do it is you have to start the conditioning or composting process of the straw by adding water and a high nitrogen fertilizer. It takes about 2 weeks before the bales are ready to plant in. They'll heat up and then cool down. But afterwards, you have this really nice growing medium. And even better, a lot of the raised beds that we do in the fall, once this is all done, we will be able to mulch those beds with the composted straw. We got about 400 pounds of paste tomatoes last year. We actually grew less plants because we had so many, but I think we might get about the same amount this year too. Each one of these plants are just these nice, dense paste tomatoes. Paste tomatoes in general are a less juicy plant, and so you get more tomato and less juice. So when you're condensing down the sauce, it just works a lot better. Now, one of the things we need for pasta sauce are onions, so let me go show you the onion bed. We're over here at the onion bed. This is a 4-foot by 12-foot bed, which is the size of all of our raised beds. And what you can see with the onions, they look a little bit strange. They're kind of flopped over here. We've harvested about 1/3 or so of the onions. Those were over on your side over here. And the onions we harvested are currently curing in the barn. Those were our medium day length onions. So when onions form, there's either a short, a medium, or a long day varieties. And depending on the variety, the point where they trigger a bulb is dependent on the day length. So a medium day length, which those ones were over here, as soon as the day got long enough, they started bulbing, and so they were ready earlier. These are all long day onions, and so they are coming in later. You can see they're flopped over. That's kind of the first sign to say that they're getting close to ready. But in general, you want a little bit more of the foliage to brown. But I can pull one of these just to kind of show you what they look like. And we did a lot closer spacing on these than last time. But so far, it still seems like our onions are sizing up pretty good. So we will be harvesting these probably within a week or two. We actually harvested our garlic about a month ago, and that has a cover crop in it, so let me show you that. So it might not look like it, but this bed actually had garlic in it a month ago. We had a great harvest of garlic, and that is fully cured in our barn, and we've been cooking with it. But this bed, eventually we are going to have fall brassicas, so cauliflower and broccoli in it, but we don't plant those until August. So we had about a 6-week period where this bed would just sit and do nothing, and ideally you wouldn't want to do that. So what is in here is actually a buckwheat cover crop. So I will come up here and show you a little bit. It's just about the time when we have to terminate it, because if we zoom in on these flowers, you're going to see it's just starting to try to form buckwheat. In fact, we better get to this because here's a little piece of buckwheat right here. So what I'm going to do with this bed is I'm going to chop all of this buckwheat down to the ground, chop it into some pieces, and then use it as a green mulch for the broccoli and cauliflower that we plant. So why would we do that? Why spend the effort to do a cover crop There's a few reasons. One is living roots in the ground are important for the soil microbiology. The other thing is that the nitrogen in your soil is very dynamic, and if nothing's growing in it, when it rains, it will actually run off and leave your beds. So by planting this cover crop, it's actually using that nitrogen to create, these green leaves. And then when we chop and drop it in the bed, that nitrogen is going to go back into the soil, and the broccoli and cauliflower can use it. I'm going to show you another crop that's done really well for us. So let's walk over to the pepper bed. So this bed right here is where we grew our peppers, and we actually grew a few dahlias in it too. Just an aside about the dahlias were new for us this year, and I thought, oh, this will be cute. We'll put just 4 little dahlia plants in there. Well, they got pretty big. They don't like the heat too much, so they're looking a little bit ragged. I'm actually going to cut these back and let them regrow some new foliage. But let me focus on the peppers here. We've got a few varieties. We have been harvesting quite a lot of them. So I'm going to cruise around here and show you a few of the varieties we are growing. These are Jimmy Nardello peppers, and they are a sort of thin-walled, very, very sweet pepper that's an Italian heirloom, so you can save the seeds on these. We've got jalapenos, which we haven't really been that great about harvesting. You can see they turn red when they're riper. They're still good when they're red. But these have been very prolific for us too. This guy right here, it's a little bit swallowed up by the dahlias, but these are actually shishito peppers. Most people think of them as these green peppers because they're usually used as a frying pepper like that, but they actually get nice and sweet over here as well. Other peppers that we really, really like, these ones down here, we've actually been eating these since June actually. These are poblano peppers, just a really nice, not too spicy, but they have a true pepper taste rather than a sort of sweet bell pepper. We do have a sweet pepper over here. It's a bell pepper like taste, but it has a different shape. These right here, these are Carmen sweet peppers, and they have more of this long shape like that. Very prolific. You can see they're kind of hiding in here, but we have quite a few in there. And these have a thicker wall, so they're more similar to a bell pepper as far as how you cook with them. Now we do have a few other plants that are in the nightshade family, eggplants and tomatillos, so let's take a look at those. So this jungle of a bed has the tomatillos, and if you actually look in here, it's funny to think about it now, but I thought this little tomato cage would be sufficient as far as a trellis for them. Obviously, I was wrong. So the tomatillos are similar to a tomato. They have a little bit of a different growth habit. Let me pick this one, kind of show you what a ripe tomatillo looks like. They grow in this little lantern, and then the fruit actually grows inside. When they're small, the lantern feels hollow, and then the fruit grows. These have sort of a very dense flesh, and it's kind of sour, almost similar to a green tomato, and they're used for salsa verde, which we are going to be making this week. Let me also show you the eggplant. So if we come around this way, we can see the eggplant, and just like the tomatillos, we've had a lot of wind, and so pretty extreme weather, I think, around the country, but a lot of wind here. These plants honestly did wonderful, and we have too many eggplant, but you can see they fell over, and I've tried to kind of prop them back up. But very prolific plants. I think these are Turkish Delight. We didn't like these too much last year. For some reason we grew them again, but we actually prefer this one over here if you want a long eggplant. This one is called Orient Express. There's a few other varieties in there. One of them is a white variety. This one's called White Knight. They start off white and then they get yellow when they're a little overripe. So these ones are going to be too woody to eat. But these are just a little too small, and we probably won't grow those again. Other thing with the eggplant that you're going to see, if you look up here, you can see the leaves have all these little holes in them, and those are from flea beetles, and you can actually see a flea beetle right there. I'll probably jump away. Maybe not. The dew kind of grabbed it. The flea beetles, they love eggplants the most. They're on a lot of different plants, but anyone who grows eggplants know they really jump to it right away. Usually by the time they're this size, they're not too big a deal, however. Speaking of pests, I want to show you one other crop that is notorious for getting pests, and it's right over here. So over here in the zucchini bed, these plants do tend to draw a lot of pests. They're really easy to grow, but there's two main pests that zucchinis get. One is just called a squash bug, and those you see very commonly kind of running around underneath the leaves of your plants. And the other one's called a squash vine borer. And the squash vine borer usually you don't see. However, that's usually the one that kills your plants. Now, for some reason, these plants are still alive in here. This variety is called Golden Glory. And as you can see, we are a little behind as far as harvesting these. But it is a yellow, kind of golden zucchini. Really good, really prolific. And these have done a lot better than the more traditional yellow squash, like a crookneck squash. So we'll be growing these again. Usually right around now is when we start seeing our plants succumbing to pest and disease pressure, which is why we have a strategy to fix that. Now, I did just notice down here, we do have some squash bugs actually in two different stages of development. So these right here, those are the squash bug eggs. And these right here, those are the squash bug nymphs, or the really young squash bugs. Sorry guys, you guys are gonna go away. And the squash bug eggs, they come in these clusters, kind of copper colored eggs, whereas the squash vine borer lays little solitary eggs all over the plant. So how do we consistently grow zucchini all season, even though it has all these pests? We succession plant them. So let's look over here. This bed has sort of our second batch of zucchini. And if we look in here, these plants are just now mature enough to have both male and female flowers. You can see the female flower has that small zucchini on it, and the male flower just looks like a regular flower. So zucchini do require pollination in order to get good fruit production. And so we will be taking this off. That is going to let the squash bugs and squash vine borer get to it. But with just only the second half of the season around, these should last until our first frost. We have another crop that also has pests, but they're very, very big pests. Let's go look at that. Over here in our sweet corn patch, this is the third year we're growing sweet corn, and hopefully the first year that we're actually eating sweet corn. And that is because a lot of things really love sweet corn, and especially raccoons. So we've grown it, like I said, the last 3 years, and this is the farthest along they've gotten. We often do a camping trip in the middle of summer, and whenever we've left on the camping trip, we've had raccoons come and just eat all of the sweet corn. So what I've done this year, I've got this electric fence. It's solar powered, and so far, if you look in here, we've actually got some corn developing, and this might be our year that we actually get sweet corn. We talked a little bit about garden pests. There's one in particular that is the worst of all of them, and I'm going to show you that down in the cantaloupe area. We're down here with the cantaloupe, and one of the things you can see about these vines, some of them look pretty healthy. We've got some plants and fruit down here. But there's a pest that often comes on cantaloupe and cucumbers, and they particularly like these melon plants, and they spread a disease called bacterial wilt. And those pests are cucumber beetles. So I can see one right here. Here is a striped cucumber beetle. Not sure if that's picking up on the camera, but they just love these melon plants. And they do kind of superficial damage. You can see You know, a lot of the leaves and the flower petals are eaten here. But what's worse about them is they spread something called bacterial wilt. So let me show you this vine right here. And you can see how it just looks ragged and floppy, and that's because bacterial wilt is a bacteria that those cucumber beetles spread, and it goes into the vascular system of the plant, and it doesn't allow transport of water or nutrients. Now we should still get a harvest. In fact, I think this one's ready right here. Yep, see how that just popped right off the vine really easily. There's a few ways you can tell if a cantaloupe is ready. One is that it tends to detach from the vine. In fact, if we look over there, you can see there's one that actually fell off of the trellis. That one just fell off last night, so we should be able to harvest it. But that's one thing you need to worry about with the cantaloupe, is that they will actually just fall off the vine when they're ripe. The other thing is that they have a nice smell that you can smell through the peel. And those are the two ways that you can tell a cantaloupe is ripe. There's other melons, watermelons in particular, that are a little bit more difficult to tell if they're ripe. So let's take a look at those. So here we are in the watermelon bed. The majority of these are sugar baby watermelons, and they're kind of this medium to small size watermelon. And we have a lot of them in here, so we're pretty excited about that. The tough thing about watermelon is knowing when to pick it, because unlike a lot of fruit, like let's say a tomato, a watermelon, and actually cantaloupe as well, will not ripen after you remove it from the vine. So if you pick it too early, you can't just put it on the counter and allow it to ripen. Now, we talked about cantaloupe being pretty easy to tell because they detach from the vine and they have that smell, but watermelon don't do that. So let me show you how we tell if they're ripe. I've got a watermelon right here. It looks pretty big, and so you might think maybe I can pick that. This one's not ripe yet, and let me show you how I know. So what I'm going to be looking for is I'm going to take this watermelon, I'm going to follow the stem that attaches it to the vine right here. And adjacent to that stem, there's going to be a tendril right here. That tendril right now is fully green. When this is ripe, this is going to become brown. And so once that's brown, generally these are going to be ripe. Sometimes people will also look at what's called the field spot underneath here and making sure that it's sort of a golden color. But I tend to just go by the tendril, and that works pretty well for us. The other thing I wanted to say about the watermelon is, just like some of our other plants, these are actually grown in straw bales. They do really well in straw bales, partly because the straw bales heat up when you condition them and allows you to plant relatively early into really warm soil conditions. I have a few other things grown in straw bales, including my pumpkins and some other squash over here, so let's take a look at those. You can't see them anymore, but there are some straw bales there that are actually supporting all of these vines. This one right down here, this is a blue Hubbard squash, and this plant I actually planted initially as a trap crop, thinking I could keep some of the squash bugs, squash vine borer, and cucumber beetles over in this far corner. But it's actually done really well, and I'm pretty excited about these squash as decorative, and you can also eat them in the fall. The pumpkins we're growing are actually over here, and they are what are called Long Island cheese pumpkins. So you can see they're not that normal orange color of a pumpkin. They're kind of more of a lighter tan color, and they're actually very closely related to butternut squash. The reason I'm growing these is they are significantly more resistant to squash vine borer than traditional pumpkins. We've grown traditional pumpkins in the past, and they tend to die from squash vine borer before I can get a good harvest out of them. So if you've had trouble with squash vine borer on your pumpkins, try the Long Island cheese pumpkins. I also want to show you my sweet potatoes. They are also growing in straw bales. Let me show you over here. This mound of foliage right here are all sweet potatoes, and right up this way there's 3 straw bales, and they have 8 slips planted in them. And I found this to be the best way to grow sweet potatoes. First of all, just like I talked with the watermelon, you plant them in very warm straw bales, and so they tend to do really well early. The other thing is that they harvest really easily. You just break apart the straw. Our most popular video we've posted is actually about our harvest last year, so I'm really excited to see how these will do this year. Last spring we planted about 20 different dwarf fruit trees in this area of the garden. And they're not all that exciting to look at right here in their first year, but they are a great investment in the future. So you can see these were planted and then cut at about knee to thigh height. And we've gotten all of this growth since we planted them in spring. In fact, as we get towards mid to late summer, these are just about ready for some summer pruning. So look for a future video where I do some summer pruning of the fruit trees, kind of explain my process with that. Even though we predominantly grow vegetables, I did want to talk about my 3 favorite midsummer flowers, and one of them's right here. These are cosmos flowers, just an orange variety, and we planted these actually last year. These are all self-seeded. One of the things I love about cosmos is that they will stay flowering all the way up into the first frost. So we often get these beautiful flowers all the way into October. Let me show you the 2 other ones that I really like as well. Zinnias are one of the quintessential midsummer flower, and I am really happy with this variety that we have here. These are the giant salmon variety, and they've just done really well and just look beautiful in this border with the cherry tomatoes that we have in the cages. The last one I wanted to talk about are a little less common. These are cleome or spider flowers, and I would say they're probably our favorite of the different flowers that we're growing. Well, these are annuals. They self-seed, so they'll come back every year. Usually in late June and sort of peaking around 4th of July, you get this puff of petals that look like a burst firework. And the bees and pollinators love these plants. They're also pretty much disease-free, and deer and other animals tend to stay away from them. So that about sums it up for our midsummer garden tour. As you can see, I've got kind of a lot of harvesting to do, so I'm going to get to that today. If you'd like to see how our Southwest Ohio garden continues to mature, especially seeing the orchard and everything mature in the coming years, go ahead and subscribe to our channel. And if there's anything you saw in the video that I didn't explain well, ask in the comments. I'm happy to answer it. We're wishing you a wonderful and bountiful summer. Happy gardening, everyone.